So think about your favorite color for a second. What's the first thing that, just pops into your head?
Right. Is it something bright, like a
Hmm.
really optimistic yellow, or
Yeah.
maybe something more calming?
Exactly, like a deep navy blue or something. Everyone has one. But the real question, and I think this is fascinating, is how deep does that preference actually go?
Hmm.
Is it just, something we learned, a trend we picked up, or is there something more fundamental, something hardwired into our biology?
It's one of the deepest questions you can ask, really. Because color is so basic, it's one of our primary sensory inputs.
Yeah.
But the meaning we attach to it, the emotion, the symbolism, that's incredibly complex. It's a collision point.
A collision between what?
I mean,
Nature and nurture.
exactly. It forces you to try and draw a line and say, okay, here's where biology ends and here's where our learned cultural systems take over.
And that clash, that tension between the universal and the specific, that is exactly what we're getting into in this deep dive.
We're going to be tracing this incredible line from human evolution right through the structure of language, all to figure out how these systems define our reality.
We're basically using color and emotion as our ultimate test cases. We're going to unpack these ancient forces that shaped our brains and then look at the cultural constructs that define how we feel about, well, everything.
We're starting 2 million years ago with the explosive growth of our brains, and we're going all the way to modern cognitive science. We're even going to see how all this can change how acidic you think a glass of wine tastes.
Okay, let's unpack this. To even start to understand the modern brain, we have to go way, way back, about 2 million years actually, to a single inflection point.
Fire.
Fire.
The controlled use of fire. It gets treated like a footnote sometimes, warmth and light. But its evolutionary impact was monumental.
It did all those things, of course. Warmth, scaring off predators, insects.
But the truly transformative part, the thing that changed the game, was that it allowed our ancestors to consistently cook their food.
And that single act, just applying heat to food, it didn't just change our diet, it changed our anatomy.
Fundamentally. And then that changed our culture, which in turn changed our anatomy again. It's this incredible cascade of consequences.
How so? What does cooking actually do biologically?
Well, you're essentially pre-digesting the food. Heat breaks down tough fibers, complex starches.
Yeah.
It makes the nutrients way easier for our gut to absorb.
So you're doing the hard work outside the body.
Precisely. And that allowed for this enormous biological trade-off. If you
Yeah.
compare our anatomy to that of great apes, our closest relatives, the difference is it's stark.
What kind of difference are we talking about?
We see a huge measurable reduction in tooth size, mouth size.
Yeah.
Even the stomach and the large intestine are smaller in humans.
We traded in the big, heavy digestive machinery.
We did. We traded this massive, energy-guzzling internal system for something way more compact and efficient.
It's like we went from a giant, gas-guzzling V8 engine designed to just grind raw stuff all day down to a super efficient hybrid system. So we suddenly have all this leftover energy. Where did it go?
That's the key. That's the energy dividend.
Yeah.
All that metabolic energy that was freed up. It allowed for, let's call them alternative infrastructure investments.
And the investment was?
The brain. The vastly enlarged, incredibly energy-intensive human brain. Even today, it burns something like 20 to 25% of our resting metabolic rate. It is a very, very demanding organ.
That's just a staggering thought that a piece of cultural knowledge, how to make a fire, how to cook something, physically drove genetic and anatomical changes in our species.
It's the absolute definition of a cultural genetic feedback loop, because that bigger brain then enabled higher-level survival skills,
Like planning.
like complex planning, caring about the future, worrying about food shortages, coordinating a defense. And crucially, the bigger brain also allowed for the invention and the successful transmission of those fire-making techniques.
Ah, so your ability to learn and to teach these complex skills, that became the new selective pressure. You had to have a brain that could handle this growing library of cultural knowledge just to survive.
That is the positive feedback spiral, what we call cumulative culturally driven evolution. Bigger brains let us create more complex culture, and the need to master that culture selected for even bigger brains.
It's like that well-known example with milk, right? The lactase persistence gene.
It's a perfect parallel. For most of human history, adults couldn't digest milk sugar. The enzyme, lactase, just switched off after childhood.
Which is still the case for most of the world's population.
Exactly. But in some populations, especially in Northern Europe and parts of Africa, they adopted farming and animal husbandry,
A cultural shift.
a cultural shift.
Mm.
And suddenly, the ability to drink milk as an adult was a massive survival advantage. That cultural practice created an intense selective pressure that favored a genetic mutation, the one that keeps that lactase enzyme switched on.
So a cultural habit over thousands of years literally rewrote our DNA.
It's a perfect, measurable example. Now, back to the brain. When researchers tried to figure out what drove this massive expansion, what were the main pressures? Was it, the classic story?
The rival cavemen fighting over territory, the whole struggle for existence between individuals.
That's the classic misunderstanding. The modern analysis, which looks at the metabolic costs, it paints a much more nuanced picture. They broke it down into three main evolutionary drivers.
Okay, what's the breakdown?
The biggest driver, about 60% of the pressure, came from just dealing with the environment. Ecological challenges,
Me versus nature.
me versus nature, finding food, surviving climate shifts. The second largest, at 30%, came from cooperation, social interaction,
That's us versus nature.
us versus nature, coordinating hunts, sharing knowledge, and only the last 10% was driven by group conflict.
Us versus them.
Right.
Wait a minute. So cooperation was 3 times more important than fighting other groups. And what about the individual competition? The cornerstone of the old view.
Statistically negligible.
Mm-hmm.
It had basically zero measurable effect on driving brain size.
That reframes everything. We got smarter because we had to work together to solve ecological problems, not because we were trying to outsmart each other.
It flies in the face of so many narratives, doesn't it? But if you think about it from an energy perspective, it makes perfect sense.
How so?
Well, investing a huge amount of energy to build a brain that helps you trick your next-door neighbor, that has diminishing returns. But a brain that helps you coordinate a massive hunt or plan for a brutal winter,
That has an exponential return for the whole
an
group.
exponential return on that energy investment.
Wow. Okay, so that sets up this core tension perfectly. Our actions, our thoughts, they're this mix of biology and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Biologically, I touch fire, I pull my hand back, it's a reflex, pure biology.
Right.
But culturally, I understand that fire is life critical, it cooks my food, keeps me alive.
So the question becomes, what truly defines the meaning of fire? Is this the heat we feel or the tradition of how we use it?
And if we wanted to try and measure that meaning across all of humanity, where would you even start?
Well, that's where things get really tricky. That's where we have to dive into language.
Right. So moving away from physical survival for a minute, let's try to map the mind itself. We have, what, over 6,000 languages on the planet?
At least. Which suggests that the meaning behind our words must be incredibly diverse. If our cultures are so different, our concepts must be too, right?
It seems logical. And the translation problem is huge. I mean, if I point to a stone or a tree, we can probably figure it out.
You can resolve the miscommunication pretty quickly with physical objects. But what about abstract concepts? What about feelings? How do we even begin to compare those?
It just feels so subjective. How could you ever turn that into quantitative data?
For a long time, it was considered impossible. You just couldn't parameterize meaning for a proper comparative study. But there was a linguistic solution hiding in plain sight,
Which was?
studying how concepts overlap within a single language, a phenomenon called polysemy.
Polysemy. Okay, so one word, multiple meanings. We see that all the time. But why is that the key?
Because the way we connect seemingly unrelated ideas with the same word isn't random. It actually reflects our underlying mental associations.
Give me an example.
Okay, take the German word Läufer. In its most basic sense, it means runner.
A person who runs. Simple enough.
Right. But it also means the bishop in chess.
The bishop. Wait. Oh, because it runs diagonally across the board. Okay, I get it.
Exactly. And it also refers to a long, narrow carpet.
A runner. A carpet runner that runs down a hallway. Of course.
And it also means a movable part of a slide rule, and even a type of stone used in masonry. All told, linguistic analysis says Läufer has 24 different meanings.
24. So the German language is showing us that in its conceptual space, running, chess pieces, carpets, and stones are all somehow linked.
They're in the same conceptual neighborhood. Or think of another one, Flügel. It means a grand piano, but it also means a bird's wing.
The shape, right. The wing-like shape of the piano lid.
The shape, but it also means the wing of a building or a position on a soccer field. The concepts are linked. Shape, flanking movement, Researchers realized that if they could map these specific shared links across thousands of languages, they might uncover a universal structure.
But how do you find a stable set of concepts to even begin mapping, especially across languages with no shared history?
They built on the work of a linguist named Morris Swadesh. Back in the 1950s, he started compiling these lists of core, stable, frequently used words, the basic core vocabulary.
Words that don't change much over time.
Exactly. They're less likely to be borrowed, they're resistant to rapid cultural shifts. So if the words are stable, any difference in meaning has to come from the cognitive structure itself, not just random language change.
That's a brilliant move. So what words did they use?
They focused on 22 specific words, representing universals found across 81 different languages. Things everyone, everywhere has to deal with.
Like what?
Material things like stone, water, fire, dust. Celestial things like sun, moon, year, day. And geographical features like mountain, river, and sky.
Okay, so they have the core concepts. How do you actually map the semantic neighborhood of stone across all those languages in a way you can measure?
This is the really cool part. They use something called collexification networks.
Collexification.
It's simple in concept, but massive in practice. When one word in a language covers two different concepts, like arloy, for example, those two concepts are said to be collexified.
Okay.
So the researchers mapped every single collexification they could find across all 81 languages.
Help me visualize that. Let's say the 22 core concepts are like balls floating in space.
Perfect analogy.
Okay.
Now, if a single word in, say, language A means both stone and mountain, you draw a line connecting the stone ball and the mountain ball.
Okay, a connection is made.
Now, if language B also has one word for stone and mountain, you don't draw a new line. You reinforce the existing one. You make it thicker.
Ah. So the thickness of the line shows how many languages share that specific link. It's a visual map of universality.
That's a very clear way to put it. Let's take the plant example they used. They looked at words like forest, tree, wood. In French, they found one word that means both wood and forest. In Russian, one word covers tree and wood.
So you'd have a line between wood and forest and another between tree and wood?
Right. And across their global database, the tree and wood connection was the most frequent collexification. That line was the thickest. It shows that globally, we conceptually group the living organism and the material substance together more than any other combination.
This sounds like a genuinely quantifiable way to map the architecture of human thought. So
Oh,
what happened when they applied this to those 22 basic physical concepts like fire and water? What did the map look like?
the finding was,
Mm.
this is astonishing, the meaning structure for these 22 core words showed remarkable universality.
So wait, the network architecture was basically the same regardless of where the language was from.
Largely the same, yes. It means that even if you speak an isolated language from the Andes, and I speak a widespread language from Europe, the conceptual space our brain gives to sun or water is fundamentally the same. The connections are the same.
Culture didn't really play a big role.
Surprisingly little. And the minor differences they did find, they couldn't link them to things like geographic distance or the local environment, or even whether the language had a written form.
So the way we mentally group the physical world seems to be hardwired, a universal cognitive foundation.
The conclusion was that powerful, yes, that this semantic structure seemed to be a universal attribute of human cognition, probably shaped by those deep survival pressures we talked about earlier.
Okay, that sets an incredibly high bar for what universal means. If the physical world is mapped so consistently in our minds, what on earth happens when you apply the same method to the really abstract, culturally loaded stuff?
Human emotions.
Human emotions.
That's the ultimate test, isn't it? If we can all agree on the conceptual space of stone, the real challenge is sadness or anger.
Right. We know they're biologically anchored to some extent. Your heart races, adrenaline spikes. But the words we use, they're all over the map. You mentioned Sehnsucht earlier, that German word for longing that we don't really have in English.
Exactly. So the question isn't whether we feel things differently, but whether the way we label and group those feelings in our heads is driven more by our biology or by our culture.
So they ran the same experiment.
They did, but on a massive scale. They analyzed 2,474 languages, focusing on 24 common emotion concepts, everything from anger and fear to joy and grief.
Okay. But there's a potential problem there. If you only look at emotion words together, they might just seem similar because Well, they're all emotions. That could skew the results.
That's a very sharp point, and it's something the researchers anticipated. So their strategy was much deeper. They didn't just look at emotion-to-emotion links.
What else did they include?
They included non-emotion concepts in the network.
Hmm.
For instance, they'd measure if both anger and envy were collexified with a word like quarrel or disease or fight.
Oh, that's smart. That gives you this rich contextual information that goes way beyond just the feeling itself.
It does. It let them build this colossal semantic map. Then, they used some very sophisticated tools to measure the conceptual distance between feelings.
Okay, what kind of tools? You mentioned random walk probabilities before. That sounds intense.
It's actually more intuitive than it sounds. Imagine that entire network of language is a giant city map. Every word, anger, quarrel, stone, is a landmark.
Okay, a city of words.
A random walk is just a simulation of a little traveler starting at one landmark and just wandering randomly through the connected streets and neighborhoods.
So if anger and quarrel are conceptually close, they share a lot of linguistic streets, then a traveler starting at anger is very likely to stumble upon quarrel pretty quickly.
You've got it. The closer the conceptual distance, the higher the random walk probability. It's a quantifiable metric for measuring how related two concepts are in a language.
Okay, so they had the method. But they needed a control group, a benchmark to compare emotions against.
And they chose color terms.
Color. Why color?
Because colors are generally seen as more natural, less culturally determined. They're tied directly to our biological hardware, the three types of cones in our eyes. It's a solid biological anchor. So they analyzed 13 basic color terms using the same method.
This is the moment of truth then, the comparison. What did they find?
Well, this was the big surprise of the whole study. The analysis suggested that emotions showed significantly higher cultural variation than colors.
Wait, no, get out of here. So,
Yeah.
so despite the fact that we all feel joy and fear, the way we linguistically structure our feelings is more fragmented across cultures than the way we categorize blue and green.
That is precisely what the data implies.
I trust my shared sense of the color blue more than I trust my shared sense of the feeling grief.
Linguistically speaking, yes. The semantic structures we build around our feelings are heavily influenced by cultural exchange. They even confirmed it another way. The greater the geographic distance between two languages, the less similar their emotion concepts were.
So cultures that are geographically close, they sort of share their emotional language.
They share more similar ways of framing and labeling their feelings, yes.
Yeah.
It suggests that our culture is actively shaping the categories of our internal experience. The language you learn subtly reinforces certain conceptual links in your mind.
What? Is it completely arbitrary then? Is there any biological anchor left for emotion at all?
No, it's not entirely arbitrary. If it were, the network would just be a random scatter plot.
Yeah.
There is still a biological influence.
And what is that? What's the anchor?
The two foundational dimensions of emotional experience, arousal and valence.
Arousal and valence. Okay, break those down.
Arousal is just the intensity, the physiological activation. High arousal is excitement or rage. Low arousal is calm or boredom.
Imbalance.
Valence is the positive or negative assessment. Basically, the good or bad feeling.
So intensity and good bad.
Correct. And those two biological axes still influence how emotions cluster together. It ensures that across all 2,474 languages, high arousal negative emotions, like fear and anger, are still conceptually close to each other.
Okay, so the biology provides the basic framework, the general neighborhood.
Exactly. And then culture comes in and draws the specific property lines and street names.
Wow. Okay, so that's the perfect transition. Because we know the biology of color is anchored by our eye cones, but we also know the meaning of color is maybe the most manipulated tool in the entire cultural realm.
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with its primal biological function. Before language, before anything, organisms use color to orient themselves. It's a fundamental survival tool.
The moment you see mold on cheese or the bright red of a ripe berry, that color is giving you critical information instantly.
It's a gatekeeper function for what you eat. Color signals quality, edibility, but it also signals vitality, mating fitness. Think of a peacock's plumage, or even subconscious signals in humans, like healthy skin tone or white teeth.
And we develop these shortcuts, right, these associations.
Yes. Dark often means danger, the unknown. Light means safety, truth. Red is almost universally an attention grabber because of its link to blood and fire. These shortcuts trigger involuntary reactions before you even have a chance to think.
And if it's involuntary, you know someone is going to use it for commerce and manipulation. Let's talk about the supermarket.
Supermarkets are meticulously designed color environments. You're being manipulated from the moment you walk in. The packaging, the lighting, it's all designed to override your rational choice.
Especially for things like desserts, coffee, baked goods.
Oh, definitely. Those deep browns, the rich creams, those specific appetizing reds,
They just look
they
delicious.
look delicious, and that visual cue triggers a direct physical response. It can stimulate your appetite, increase digestive activity, even cause an anticipatory drop in your blood sugar as your body prepares for the
And
calories.
that response leads to overconsumption. I've totally experienced that. You walk past a display of pastries right after lunch and suddenly you're craving one.
It's your visual system overriding your satiety signals. It's incredibly effective. And think about fast food branding. One major chain had to completely redesign their coffee sections
Why?
because their primary colors, bright red and yellow signal speed, urgency, energy. Great for a quick burger, terrible for a relaxed coffee break. They had to create separate spaces with soft browns and creams to signal relaxation and tap into those appetite effects.
But the interpretation is still cultural, right?
Right.
The mechanism is innate, but the meaning changes.
That's the nuance. Red universally grabs your attention, but in one culture it might mean ripe and delicious. In another it could mean extreme spice, danger, and historically the availability of pigments dictated everything. Expensive dyes in Europe meant certain colors became signals of status. Abundant natural pigments in India meant vibrant colors were for everyday celebration.
Let's shift from commerce to art. How do artists deliberately harness these effects?
They use the grammar of color theory. We all know the basics, primary, secondary colors. But the emotion comes from the interaction.
Like complementary colors, red and green, blue and orange.
They're opposite on the color wheel, and when you put them side by side, they create this incredible visual tension. They almost vibrate. They create excitement,
Whereas colors that are next to each other are analogous colors.
like blue, blue, green, and green. They create harmony, calm, they flow. And then there's the most basic emotional split, warm versus cool.
Reds, oranges, yellows are warm. They feel energetic, passionate. They seem to come forward.
And the cool colors, blues, greens, violets, they're calming, maybe melancholy. They feel like they recede into the distance.
Which brings us to artists like Joseph Albers. His whole homage to the Square series was about this, right?
Albers was a master of demonstrating the relativity of color. He used these nested squares to prove that you never see a color in isolation. A block of gray surrounded by bright orange will look completely different than the exact same gray surrounded by a cool violet.
He's forcing you to see that your perception isn't fixed. It's a dynamic experience happening inside your own mind.
Exactly. And then you have someone like Mark Rothko who used these huge canvases with large fields of color to create these immersive, meditative atmospheres. He wasn't trying to decorate. He was trying to express fundamental human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, just through color.
People have incredibly visceral reactions to his work. Is there a neurological basis for that?
There is. Viewing art activates deep brain areas linked to emotion, memory, and reward. A balanced, colorful painting can literally trigger a dopamine release, a feeling of joy. More abstract or challenging works stimulate areas linked to problem solving. It's a full brain workout.
Okay, let's bring this into our own environment. Architectural design. We've seen this massive trend toward pastels lately.
Pastels are powerful because they lower your cognitive load. Those soft, muted colors, mint green, rose pink, they evoke calm, they reduce stress. They're used in branding like Instagram's gradient to feel approachable, and in offices to foster well-being instead of urgency. They're non-threatening.
Now we have to talk about the most controversial case study in all of this, the pink cell phenomenon. Baker Miller pink.
Yes. This idea took off in the late 70s. A researcher claimed that staring at a specific shade of bubblegum pink could temporarily reduce muscle strength and aggression.
So correctional facilities started painting cool-down cells pink for aggressive inmates.
They did, across the US, Switzerland, Germany. The idea was that this color had a universal calming effect.
Did it work? Was it a breakthrough?
It's a phenomenal example of belief running way ahead of the science. The data is highly mixed and often contradictory.
What's the problem with the studies?
The main issue is a lack of rigor. Many early studies didn't properly control for brightness or saturation, which we now know have a huge effect on emotion. And critically, many think the results were due to novelty or expectation effects.
Meaning if an inmate is told the pink room is supposed to calm them down, they calm down.
It's very likely a factor. The effect just isn't robustly reproducible. It seems to be more of a cultural or psychological expectation than a fundamental biological response.
Okay, let's bust another myth. Interior Design 101. If you have a low ceiling, you paint it a lighter color than the walls to make the room feel taller.
That rule is everywhere. The assumption is that the contrast, or just the brightness of the ceiling, creates an optical illusion.
Has anyone actually tested it?
They have, using virtual reality. They put people in virtual rooms and systematically changed the colors and heights and asked them to estimate. And the results, they completely contradicted the classic rule.
So the illusion doesn't work.
Well, people are actually pretty good at estimating the real height. And the data showed that the difference in brightness between the ceiling and walls wasn't the key driver.
So the contrast doesn't matter.
Not nearly as much as the overall light level. The perception of height is driven primarily by the ceiling brightness and secondarily, additively, by the wall brightness. A lighter room overall just feels higher.
So the scientifically sound rule should be to make a room look taller, make the whole room, especially the ceiling, as bright as possible.
Precisely. It's a classic design rule that just doesn't hold up to empirical testing.
Okay, one last thing before we wrap up. The overlap between color and taste.
Right, the visual cue as a gatekeeper. Your brain uses the color of food to anticipate its flavor ripeness, sweetness.
So what happens if you take away the color of the food itself, but change the color of the environment?
A brilliant experiment tested exactly that. They had people taste a dry Riesling wine from completely opaque black glasses.
So you can't see the wine's color?
Right, but they did this under 3 different ambient lighting conditions: red, green, or blue.
So the room itself was colored. What happened?
The ambient color significantly influenced the perceived taste of the wine. Under green light, the wine tasted less sweet and more intense, like you'd expect from something unripe.
And under red light?
Under red light, the perception of sweetness increased significantly.
That is incredible. The expectation generated by the room's color overrode the actual chemical senses on the tongue?
It suggests that the ambient color acts as a generator of flavor expectations. The mental shortcut red means ripe and sweet, was activated by the environment and then just applied to the taste.
It's just a constant negotiation, isn't it? Between our basic primate biology, our 3 types of eye cones, and the complex cultural rules we layer on top of it. So what does this all mean? We've gone on this massive journey starting 2 million years ago with fire and cooking, creating the energy surplus for our brains to grow.
A growth that favored cooperation over competition as the main evolutionary engine.
And those bigger brains allowed for complex language. And we found that the words for basic physical things like stone or fire have this astonishingly universal structure, a shared cognitive foundation for all humans.
But then when we looked at abstract emotions like anger or grief, we found huge cultural variation, more variation than for even basic colors. Our feelings are, linguistically at least, shaped more by culture than biology.
Although the core biological anchors of valence and arousal still keep that network from flying completely apart.
Right. And we saw that the power of color in the real world is this constant battle between what our eyes see biologically and what our minds expect culturally, from food packaging to a Rothko painting.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is the need for critical thinking. We have to constantly distinguish between measurable biological fact, like the impact of ceiling brightness on height, and cultural fiction, like unproven design advice or commercial myths like the pink cell phenomenon.
It's so important because these things do have real psychological impact, but the way we interpret them is so easily corrupted by bad science or commercial interests.
So to leave you with one final thought to chew on, let's go back to the very foundation of color perception itself. Think about a concept in vision called metamerism. This is the phenomenon where completely different physical light spectra, totally different combinations of wavelengths hitting your eye can produce the exact same color perception in your brain.
So 2 things can look identical under one light source, but be completely different colors under another. And under that first light, your eye cannot tell the physical difference. We literally see different things as the same.
So if our fundamental biological sensory system allows for that kind of deceptive equivalence, this trick of light and interpretation in something as basic as vision, how much deeper do the psychological and cultural illusions go? What other facts about our reality, about our emotions or our behaviors might just be a trick of cultural expectation, masquerading as a universal truth? It just reminds you that what we see is always a perception, never the absolute reality.